Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're actually going to be going back and taking a look at some of the words that we discussed the other day and actually try to practice some of them. We're going to start off with the ones that I had mentioned at the end, had just essentially just gone through. What we're going to do is try to create sentences for each of those words. That way we can practice how to implement these words stronger in our own stories. Kind of working backwards here, but I think this is a good way of just taking these words and forming our minds around them so we can have a better understanding of what we're trying to do. So let's get into it. As always, I will be only going over a little bit of the book, so go check it out for yourself. I will be linking it in the description. Other strong verbs. Alarm. So a way we could say this here is he was alarmed by the fact that there was a bug in his room. We can see a difference between he was concerned or alarmed. We're creating another level for him. Boot. He got the boot. He got kicked out. This is an idea that the person is removed. Congregate. Come together is kind of a weak word. So congregate creates an idea of a large gathering, more of a mob rather than an actual some people coming together, but a congregate. They congregated together in the square. These are ways of increasing the tangibleness of what's going on. Drenched. This isn't, they just didn't get wet. They got drenched. They got hit with so much water that they are drenched. Electrify. When we use a word like electrify, we can have a couple different meanings. Either A, the line was electrified, somebody was touching the line was electrified, somebody was touching the line. In the movie Jurassic Park, the electrical fence was not electrified until they electrified it. Therefore, when that took place, Timmy got blasted off of it. Elicit or invoke. These are kind of the same word, which is why I put them together. We're trying to elicit a response, or we're trying to invoke an idea. They're kind of similar, different sides of the coin, but they have different spheres. So elicit, that's more of your trying to get a action or a response with an action. And evoke is more of a response internally, a more mental response. Elicit a idea is the same thing as invoking. So that's something else we could do. Fester, the idea of things dying, festering, wound festers, the relationship festers. These are ideas where there is a necrosis of what's going on. Necrosis is an aspect of festering, where something is dying, something that's living is dying and turning to toxicity. Flaunt, we're using this idea as he's flaunting his wealth, he's flaunting his money. Gag, we can use this in two different ways. There was a gag order placed on the person, which means that they were unable to talk about it, or they gagged. It was a innate response to something disgusting that they were saying. Ignite, her words ignited a fire in my heart, or by touching the match to the gasoline, he ignited the house. We're creating a spark with this idea where we're building more than he lit the match. He lit the house on fire. He ignited. He is creating a beyond what's expected and creating tangible emotional outcomes here. As with all of these, muster. The idea of mustering is gathering. This is typically used in a military sense. They're mustering the troops. We are gathering them together, but because we're using muster versus congregate, which are kind of the same thing, but they have different feelings. So a congregate is more of a gathering of civilians, people who are just laymen, whereas muster implies a gathering of professionals, people who are in the same sphere of professionals. Pave, he paved his way through the crowd. It's the idea of pushing through. It's moving through the crowd versus paved. Paved gives this idea that he's not being deterred, that there's a straight line, that everybody else is being moved out of the way. Punt, he is punting responsibilities. It's not that he's just handing off the responsibilities or he's not taking on the responsibilities, but rather he's getting it as far away from him as possible. Radiate, she radiated joy. She radiated love. These are different ways of saying, she looked lovely, or she caused love to be felt by everybody. Radiate is a way of adding another layer. Roast. His friends roasted him on his hair or roasted him on his shoes. These are different ways of saying these same things. Salivate. He salivated at the idea of getting his hands on that gold, on that car. We're creating a mind feel for what the person's expecting. Salivate is one of those words that there is a innate response tied to it subconsciously. Slander. This is more than he lied, but rather he purposely lied with the way of causing harm for the person he's slandering. These are hard words we're saying, and smear is kind of the same way, but there's a difference when we're talking about smear versus slander. Slander is a actual lie where you're actually telling somebody a falsehood for the harming of the other person. Smear could mean that you're actually using truth. Could mean that you're smearing this person, but you're using truth to do it, or you're pulling truth out of context to smear somebody. They're different words, but they kind of mean the same thing. Tax. His presence was taxing on her. These are an idea where you're being pulled from something. Taxing something is that you're pulling money away from somebody, but there are different types of taxes. An emotional tax. The guy is not pleasant to be with, and so therefore he is emotionally draining, emotionally taxing for those around him. Thrill. He had the thrill of the chase, the idea of that he is getting excited about what's going on. Or this person is excited because they are going through a particular emotional journey, that this idea of thrill pulls people along. Validate. It's not that it is marked as true, but it's validated, that there is a idea that somebody who has experience or has expertise or somebody who knows what's going on says, yes, this is true, where there's an outside third party that is agreeing that these are true things. So these are just some of the strong verbs that I mentioned in the last video. So let's get into some of the other ones. Attack. The idea of going after somebody, typically violently. You attack somebody not just physically, but also emotionally. To surprise, ambush, or blitz. Blitz is a German word you would see this in the term Blitzkrieg, which is what the Germans did in early World War II. It's a German word of quick attack, to do harm, assail, or assault. These are different ideas of the same thing. Assail is more of a idea of assault, that you are assailing something, you are attacking something, whereas assault is more about the actual point of confrontation. He assaulted, he hit, he struck. These are all same ideas. To take over, besiege or invade. Besiege is that you are preventing movement from outside. Invading, you're taking over. They are kind of different, but they're kind of the same. Besiege is more of an idea of preventing and controlling externally, whereas invade is you're overtaking. Specifically, you're wiping out, you're removing the opposition from the enemy and taking over and wiping them out. There are two different ideas here. Hurriedly, charged versus rush. Somebody could be charging something, or somebody could be rushing something. Charging is you have a purposeful understanding of what you're looking to do, whereas a rush is typically a panic style idea of charge. You are rushing the battlements. Typically, when you're rushing something, you're not thinking about the plan. But with the charge, there could be a plan. There's an idea. They are kind of interchangeable, but they aren't the same thing. And that's one of the things I want to get across here is that these words have different emotional feels to our readers. And that's something that we need to be taking into account when we tell these stories. Laugh. Quietly. Chuckle or titter. Remember what I mentioned in the last video about making sure you're using the right words for the genre that you're working in. If there's a word that you don't know, don't use it, because if you are in that sphere of reading what you're writing, you will be familiar with words that are less or more common in those story genres. So for me, I'm not in a sphere, a genre where the word titter is typically used or used at all. I have never seen that word. But because I understand the context of what's going on, this will allow me to go, I get what's going on. I get what's being said. Now, one of the things that you can use here is that while you are taking into account that it is not a common word, it can be used in other ways. For instance, if you have a character who uses the word titter, but used with enough context clues, this is a signifier that that character is somebody who uses it and is different than somebody else. So basically what I'm saying is that just because it's not a common word doesn't mean that it never gets used. But we can use the unknown to point to the known. Chuckle, the idea of it is a internal almost, where it's more personal, where you're not sharing it. Whereas the opposite is loudly, where you're bellowing, howl, or roar. These are two different levels of idea of loudly. Bellow, somebody is loud, verbose. Howl, they are finding it so funny that they are being loud in their laughter. Roar typically denotes a group, a loud group of. But this is not necessarily the case. Howl and roar are kind of the same thing. But if you use the differences, if you use howl versus roar in different scenes, you can actually help set up your story and your scenes a little bit more specific and a little tighter. So if you have somebody howl, but then something else happens and then the whole scene roars, the whole crowd roars, this gives a difference in our stories that helps create a broader understanding. Daintily, giggle, or tee-hee. Tee-hee is typically sort of like one of those like words that is not an actual word, but is just saying what that sounds like. Giggle is that same idea, but both of these are something where there's a emotional idea that's being associated with it. So if a 6'6" burly man giggles, that's a little weird. But a debutante can giggle or tee-hee, and it is not unexpected. Now, depending on what's going on in the scene, if you have a female character giggle or tee-hee, this can be seen as a flirtatious element of laughter. The guy, the hero, is going in and making a joke, and the crush, love interest, or what have you, is tee-heeing or giggling. That is a reciprocation of the joke, which is a form of flirtation. Scornfully, cackle, crow, taunt. Crow is not a word that I have commonly seen as used for scornfully. But if we take context clues and make it seem that he is crowing after somebody, I just really want to point this out, that we want to make sure that we are using not just the words, particularly if they're uncommon words, but also words that are surrounded by context clues if they don't work. So for instance, in the word like crow, somebody is saying, talking, you have a dialogue between two characters talking about a third one. They are using the word crow about derivatively about how this person laughed in this scenario. This is a way that we can create distance between our dialogue parties and that third person. Using a unknown word can help us create a disconnect between that third party and our readers. Now, if we are rooting for the character that crows, this will be inversed, because what ends up happening is that because we are associating with the person that's being talked about, we are seeing the two parties, dialogue parties, talking about it in a completely different way. It changes how we perceive them. Push. Gently. You're elbowing through, you're nudging through, press or shoulder. Now, these are different ways, and we're using ideas of gently getting through a crowd. Typically, when we're talking about elbowing through a crowd, are you elbowing somebody? You're getting somebody's attention, or you're trying to shoulder is typically more aggressive in its idea. Harshly, bulldoze, butt, thrust. These are kind of violent in their way of trying to get through. But that's the idea of harshly, is that we are taking a situation where somebody's trying to force their way through and force their way into the foreground. Together, they are moving together, they're pushed together, they merge into one. Now, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily going to become one, but they are going to become connected when we push them together. Even if it's just the idea of pushing them together, this creates a oneness, even if it's just temporarily. Stab. Mildly. Perforated or prick. Somebody gets stabbed with a fork. That's perforation. Somebody, they get a little prick with the finger. This creates an idea in our reader's mind, because mostly everybody, has had an instance where they've accidentally stuck themselves with a sharp object, whether it's a knife or, a thumbtack. Moderately. Jabbed versus puncture. Jab is an idea of somebody jabbing somebody. It is usually pushed in the idea of somebody taking an action against somebody else, whereas puncture doesn't require both parties. It doesn't even require any parties. You can have a tree branch punctured the roof. This is an idea of non-sentient objects interacting with each other. So remember, this is that some words have specific ideas associated with them, whether or not it is a party, a sentient party or non-sentient party, taking action from one point to another severely. Gore versus impale or spear. Typically, spear is a extremely violent way of doing it. Gore is the after effects of what's going on. Sometimes you'll have animals that are called to have gored somebody with their tusks or whatnot. And pale is one of those things where there isn't requirement for sentient or non-sentient living biological creatures to do the work or to do something. So that's all I had for today. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.